Hi, everybody. Welcome to Watches with Dennis. Sorry, I was a few seconds late. I apparently thought I could go and do a load of laundry faster than I actually could. But I am here now, and we are going to have a conversation. Don't know if it'll go the full hour, but I thought it would be an interesting one. And that is the notion of collecting versus being an enthusiast in the space. So this kind of came up on the last live stream a little bit while we were having a conversation. And then I was on a panel over at Casual Watch Reviews, and it kind of came up there too. And after all of that, someone who had participated or seen that show had shared a link to an article. I have the link in the video description to this. It's kind of going to serve as our basis loosely. It'll serve as our basis. And Thomas from the Escapement Show actually shared this also on the Discord. But I do have it in the link below, so you don't have to go to the Discord to find it. It is fairly lengthy. It's from 2022. And someone named Alan Farmello wrote an article called The Watch Collector Enthusiast Dichotomy and Its Discontent. Well, let me share it. And its discontents, the phenomenology of watches as spiritual practice. Now, I'm a fairly pragmatic individual, so I'm not going to dive into the kind of religious overtones and spiritualism aspects that this article goes into, because for me, I get where he's going. He's trying to, let me kind of explain it. I just think maybe it goes a little too far, or at least too far for me to be comfortable in that space. So, but basically what Alan has done is he goes through and he lays out a case for what we think of as the proper pyramid of watch engagement, let's say. And I'll actually go ahead and just share that part now. So this is how Alan describes, and I do agree with this. This is how, broadly speaking, I don't know if I'd use the same labels off on the right here that he did, but broadly speaking, this is the tiering that we tend to see from people into watches or into watch collecting. You have your watch collectors who are the top of your pyramid. They're the most pure. They're the ones that are the most serious. They're the ones that are the true hobbyist, as you might say. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, you have just they labeled it here, watch consumer. Civilian is a term that's been used. I usually use the word casual. Like if you're casually into watches, you might own more than one watch. I don't even know if I'd say you're casual with just one watch. That's just a person. But a casual person might have a few. Here's a case in point for me. Pocket watches. I don't know any pocket watches. Pocket knives. A lot of people into watches are into knives. I see a lot of everyday carry stuff that gets shared on a variety of these, wrist shot platforms and all the rest of it. I have a number of pocket knives. I am not a pocket knife collector. I am not into pocket knives. I've just sort of like accumulated them along the way. I've deliberately bought a few with a purpose in mind. I regularly only carry one in my pocket. It's the same one that I've been carrying for a year, which replaced another one I had, which I broke. So I am very casual when it comes to pocket knives, because I have enough that I'm probably got more than, I guess, what a normal person would have. But most of them sit in a box, and I don't think about them. I don't consider them assets, anything along that line. So that's sort of the bottom of the pyramid, like you see here. And then there's that middle space. And that's where the average person inserts, or the average collector, let's just say watch enthusiast. Well, I don't want to say that because the enthusiast is in there. Average person into watches, put it like that. I'm sorry, I saw Koji's thing about the spelling. I did not make this chart, so so is it dilettantes? Is that the one that stands out strangely? I'm not sure. I didn't spell check it, but I saw that and I thought, I'm not sure that's how that's supposed to be written. But anyway, welcome Koji, by the way, to the live stream, and thank you for being a 99 Club member. Same to Duncan, welcome as well, and Thomas. Thank you for sharing the link on the Discord to this article, and good day to you, sir. All right, so in that middle area is sort of where enthusiasm is inserted broadly by those into watches. It denotes you're into them more than a normal person, but you're not a collector, so you're not like you have no intellectual heft behind it, I guess, is kind of the idea. Now, the bulk of the article goes through trying to make an argument that pyramid is wrong. It's not actually completely inverted, but basically Alan feels that the collector and the enthusiast should be swapped. So I don't know why the pyramid gets again. There's a spelling here too. Maybe I should have redone these charts. But the he inverted the pyramid, but that doesn't make sense to me. I think he meant to keep. This is my take. I think this pyramid shape is correct. He just wants to move the labels. I don't know. I don't know why it was designed this way, but basically, don't think of it in terms of how many people are in each bucket, because that's what the pyramid implies. But normally, the casual, the lowest level would be the broadest for obvious reasons. So anyway, what he was getting at though is that consuming watches is the most base level, which isn't any real different than the watch. I mean, he's phrased it all as an experience. That's why the language is different. But consumerism is the lowest form of engagement. He puts collecting in the middle, and the argument is that the value in collecting is that it's satisfying from an intellectual standpoint. You're putting together some concept, right? You're going after every model line of Seiko, or you're going after all of the model line of Seiko, or you're trying to get an entire year's worth of something. Like, there's a structure to it. But to Alan, in this write-up, the experience of being an enthusiast is actually the highest plane of existence. And again, he goes very much into a spiritual argument here, which I get what he's going for. I kind of personally feel it's a bridge too far, but maybe that's just because I do exist as a more pragmatic individual. But the idea is that aesthetic satisfaction is superior to intellectual satisfaction. Now, we're still stratifying, obviously, so I don't know if this just pisses off a different group of people or what. It's merely some groundwork for our conversation. I've never thought about it in this level of detail. So I found this whole article, and it's quite long, very, very interesting. But the notion is that rather than it being about the object, it should be about the experience behind the object. And that's kind of where I want to explore a little bit, but then I want to get maybe a little more grounded in terms of what we think of as consumer and enthusiast, and if we even think they're different or not. And so where the article is going is that, owning a watch, buying a watch, there's the high with the purchase, there's the thrill of the hunt. That's the consumerism. That's the basest level. That's the least sophisticated, for lack of a better word, because there is a judgment behind all of what he's done. But it's one that I think a lot of us understand. I know a lot of people that it's not really about the watch ultimately. It's about trying to get the watch. I see this in pinball a lot too. Some people are after really rare machines, and they're rare either because they're so old and they were never preserved in the old days. They were thrown away, or they just didn't make very many of them. But there's a desire to get it for its simple being, not because it's a fun game to play. There's a lot of that with watches too. I've seen plenty of people who must surely know the watches they're collecting are incredibly ugly, but they're not after it for some aesthetic satisfaction or that it fits their style or anything. It's about filling the slot. And for me, baseball cards is kind of a good example of this, or maybe even coin collecting, which are two things I did in my youth, and I still have those things. I don't even like baseball. Like as a sport, I don't like watching it. But I liked collecting cards, and I read the stats and all. It was, again, it filled that nerdy, I don't know, OCD niche that I wanted to scratch, but I didn't really care to actually watch the games. And coin collecting was even, it didn't have the auspices of tying to a particular sport. So I guess there's kind of less judgment there in terms of just collecting to collect. But again, it was about like trying to get every year of Lincoln Penny or whatever. Even you can coin collect on the cheap. It's just you're just trying to fill out a catalog, and that was that getting into his second tier on his inverted pyramid. Even though I don't think it should be inverted, the middle layer being the idea of this intellectual satisfaction, that's what collecting is scratching, is that intellectual side. But then the bulk of his article goes into this notion of the experience of the watch. Not you look at the watch and you like the watch, and the watch is like well constructed, well hand finished, beautiful dial, but how it makes you feel. And he goes way into that. And there, obviously, that he's not wrong that is a big component of being into anything. Usually, if you're into it for some artistic reason, it's because it scratches some itch that pleases you in some way. And he spends a lot of time in his article explaining how he doesn't think people have a good vocabulary for it and they don't know what they're saying. And so he uses examples like when you say something like, I don't know, I just like it. That's where you're having trouble articulating your enthusiasm for something. But you're trying to show that you're enthused. And so you say some blasé term like that. And people get what you mean though. Mission accomplished in that regard. So interesting, but to me, I don't think, maybe people should think of it this way, but I think this is going way too theoretical or pseudo intellectual or truly intellectual. I don't know, because he talks a lot about this in this article. He goes on and on about how this is like a theory of his, but I don't know. Fascinating article. I really enjoyed reading it. It felt a bit forced to me in some way, not like he doesn't believe this, but rather there's this huge attempt to flip 2 layers of the pyramid, but get into this notion that there's like this higher level experience, and it's like it brings you to a state of ecstasy. And I'm just like, I just think it's a little far for me. We don't tend to use those same terms with other arts. I think he thinks we do. I don't think so. Because for me, the strongest parallel to where I think the article was trying to go is music. You can find a painting or whatever that you will like, and for whatever, be like, I like it. I don't know. It's soothing. It's interesting. There's new things to look at. Music's easier for me to explain, because based off of my mood, I will play different types of music. There's music for when you're sad. There's music for when you're excited. There's music for when you want to just jam along. There's music when you're trying to go to sleep. There's so many different things. People completely understand this. It's so innate. So he's trying to do that with watches, but it feels like it's too tied into like a religious experience when it comes to watches. And I don't know if that's just because it's more expensive than buying a MP3, and so we need to justify it in a stronger way. So for me, where I'd like to take this with those of you who are watching live, and if you're not, you can leave a comment on your thoughts on what do you think, what do you go with as a difference between a watch enthusiast and a watch collector? Or do you even see it as a difference? So good morning, Kevin. I want to go ahead and greet the chat real quick for those I hadn't said hello to, and good morning to Patrick. So in terms of my general thoughts, it's hard for me to, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be a watch enthusiast and you can be a watch collector. I don't really use the words as synonyms though. So sometimes I might inadvertently, but because as a general rule, I've had an assumption that if you're a watch collector, you are a watch enthusiast, but that doesn't have to be true. I could imagine someone who doesn't really care about what, we know about people who buy watches for monetary reasons. So if you're going along and like trying to collect something in the hopes that it appreciates, like let's say you want an example of every Rolex Daytona reference, but you don't care about wearing the Daytona. You don't find the Daytona interesting. You just know that it's a potential asset. I guess you could be still labeled as a collector, but that even feels nebulous to me. But let's assume you have that intellectual underpinning that Alan in his article goes into, and you know all about the references. Like you built up the knowledge base. It's not just like buying pork bellies or how I buy index funds, where I don't know anything about the details in the index. I don't care. It's an index. I have it for a reason, and it's not it's for it to appreciate, not for me to appreciate it. So I guess you could have a collector that isn't an enthusiast, but I think most collectors would fall into both camps. For me, where I've always drawn the line when I really think about it is an enthusiast is really driven about the wearing of the watch. The collector is driven about the owning of the watch. And obviously, since there's not like massive rent-a-watch things, watch enthusiasts also own their watches, and most watch collectors also wear at least a portion of their collection. So again, there's overlap, but I've talked about it several times on this channel, but I let watches go relatively frequently, I would say. I like ever since I really got into collecting, ever since the first year, I think every year I've let a watch go. I've either sold it, traded it, or given it away. And it was a watch I was wearing up until that point. It wasn't like it's just a watch I somehow ended up with. and then was just like, okay, well, somehow I got this. Like, people don't say, I don't get watches in and review them. So people don't just like send me watches to do something with where I have no interest in it. So it's kind of not a scenario I run into. But getting into that, I think you understand I'm going. It's like, for me, it's that I want to wear them. If I'm not wearing them, I start to question why I own them. A collector doesn't have to ask that question. And I don't have to ask that question, but I find myself doing it. So, for example, I don't remember what, this is my Citizen, the Citizen. I hate that name. I don't remember. So the AQ 4100 or whatever. It's one of their high accuracy quartz models. I didn't do my wrist check this morning, so there's a vague look at it. There's a whole review of this if you want to see it on my channel, where you'll get much better footage than me holding it up to a webcam with shaky autofocus. But the so for me, I have some, like my Spiro Agnew watches. I don't like, one of them I never wear because it's not been serviced, and one of them I very occasionally wear. We're talking like less than 5 times a year. Those I have for collecting purposes. I have them for a reason, and it's not for the wearing. Um, my dad gave me a couple of his watches. One of them is smaller than I like to wear, so I don't wear it. It's in the collection. I don't have a plan to sell it, but it just is part of the collection. This watch is an enthusiast watch. If I wasn't wearing the Citizen anymore, I would sell it. Like, I wouldn't keep it. There, I just even though it's a limited edition, like, there's nothing, my possession of it has nothing to do with it being limited. Um, I don't own it because I think it will appreciate. And if I was, it killed my Oris Pro Pilot. I had an Oris Pro Pilot, which was my first titanium watch. And since this one got all the wrist time as my newer titanium watch, the Oris went. I sold it. So that for me is that distinction. But again, it is probably a fairly arbitrary line to draw, in my opinion. That's why looking at an article like this, I feel like I think this is trying to put it on a plane too high. Like, I get it. It's a hobby. A lot of us do spend a lot of money on it. And if we don't, we probably spend a lot of time on it. And that's what hobbies do. I don't see the point in trying to raise it to the sort of transcendental plane of reality sort of thing. Again, maybe it's because I came over to this later than when I was in pinball or in coin collecting. Like, I didn't encounter any of that kind of, almost as snobbish to me, in a way, to try and just justify it on this level, like it's a near on spiritual experience. So somehow I don't know, it comes across as like trying to be better than other things. Again, people have these experiences with other arts. There's an artistic component to watches, just like there's an artistic component to pinball, but it's not the primary per se. More so with watches, obviously, because they're a part of you in the sense that you wear them. So just like you want your shoes to go with your pants, otherwise you're going to call attention to yourself in a way you probably didn't want, unless that's your goal. That's kind of that vein that it falls in. I don't know. I just found that a little, it's a fascinating article. I don't like his way of doing it, but I thought it was interesting to talk about. So let us see here. Koji says in the chat, I've cried listening to music, cried reading a book, watching a movie. I've never cried looking at or wearing a watch. Maybe someone has. Probably only if they broke it, Koji. I don't know. However, I have found myself, like, I've never cried looking at a painting, but I have found myself just looking at a painting, and it makes me think, am I thinking about the painting or am I thinking about something else? I don't know, but I can sit and just look at something like that. And I've done that with some of my watches, not many, but like the longer one. There are just some times where I've just be like, I don't know, I find it calming. I find it calming to just sit and look at the dial for 15 seconds. And I don't know. It's just like, it's almost like just taking a deep breath, but visually. That's about the best way I could describe it. So like Koji, I've not had like a major emotional reaction to any watch that I've had, but there are some watches that I've had that when I look at them or I wear them, they're very comforting, is maybe the best way to put it, and soothing. And so there's something there, but it's not to the same level as sitting and listening to a piece of music that I really appreciate. It's not, they're just not the same. Patrick says, collector cares about money value and retention. Enthusiasts care about design, movements, etc. That's an interesting split. I could see some collectors, some people that might argue would say, well, I'm collecting movements. Like that's my thing. It's like, okay, I've got the ETA, 28 to 24. I've got the Sleeta 300-1, and now I've got a Miyota 9000 series. And now I need to get myself a coaxial from Omega. So I could see a collection that's built around, and they would still have your other piece, though. It'd have the retention. Like the goal is to get, they basically just want cased up movements. So the goal is to get all these various flavors of movements and assemble them into a collection. I don't know if there's anyone like that. I think there must be. I know some people like the host of Watch Art Sai. He's very much into movements, and I don't know. I've never asked him. I'd like to think he thinks that he's collected a variety of movements, but he's both, right? Though he's clearly an enthusiast as well. I would say, per my definitions. Tuna, thank you for being a 99-cent club member, by the way. Pure semantics, Dennis. One likes watches or they don't. Most people just buy them to tell the time. Well, absolutely, but the modern collecting hobby probably agrees with this chart where it's like, oh yeah, well there's I don't know about calling them pariahs, but this idea that there's just a general watch consumer who's either occasionally gets a few watches for various occasions, or is what I was for a long time and just wore one watch. Like I wore one watch ever since I was a kid. It was, the watch changed over time. Like it was a Timex, and then I had a Citizen, and then when I started working, I got my Explorer 2, and then I wore that for like 15 plus years without wearing anything else other than I think I had one other. I got a relic watch someone gave me for Alaska, and it had the relic had I'm just going to whine about the relic for a little bit. It has like an icon of a guy swimming in water, and all I did was submerge that watch in a creek, and I got water in the movement. And I didn't know anything about that at the time. It was a quartz watch, so I had the battery changed because I figured the water damaged the battery, and then the watch worked for like another week, and then it went out again. And I think maybe I finally threw it away. I had that watch lying around in a bag somewhere around. I'm like looking around like I still have it right beside me for no obvious reason. But anyway, the watch consumer, just the notion of a normal, I usually call them casuals or normies. That sounds a little pejorative though. The most people, normal people. Yeah, they obviously yes, they're a part of an acquisition that's just driven by function, really. Function or maybe aesthetics, but it's still not driven by interest in the unit itself, the watch itself. Duncan says, I think the biggest difference is an enthusiast just likes a watch and buys it. They don't care how it fits with their other watches. A collector is all about how a new watch fits in the collection. That's an angle, Duncan, that a lot of people have gone with. And that's where I've sometimes used it that way too. I've wondered, am I just an enthusiast? Because if you looked at my watch boxes, what rhyme or reason is there? You can start to see my personality, I think, in there. You start to see so I favor very simple watches. Like most of my watches are time only or time plus date. I only own one chronograph. So that says something. Maybe it says I'm cheap, but it also might just say that I like more basic stuff. My designs generally aren't very far out there. Not a lot of avant-garde stuff. So most of my watch stuff is pretty boring. My only really weird stuff is collectible stuff that's themed around arcading, which is obviously another hobby of mine, or like the Spirou stuff, which I have a poli-sci background. So people might draw it to that. It wasn't really driven by that, but it is an assumption someone could make about my personality from the watches. I tend to have a lot of dress watches, but is that about collecting, or the fact that they find out that I'm usually in long sleeve button down shirts most days? In which case it's a logical watch to wear. I'm not out there working in the dirt. Like some of the people who work for me are out working outside. They probably would not wear the same watch as I would wear. So there's definitely about, I've wondered about that. I've put rules in, much like how a collector has rules. Like a collector might be like, I'm trying to get every version of the Seiko Samurai. I have rules about like the number of different brands I want in my collection and stuff, but it's not quite the same either, is it? It's, if you looked at my collection, you probably, and I told you, what's your analysis of how my collecting style is? I don't think anyone would have said, unless they had already heard me say, I noticed that you don't have more than 2 of any brand in the collection. You're deliberately limiting yourself, which is true, but it's not obvious to anyone like that. And the reason for that isn't that I want, like, why not just limit to 1? Like, it's it's an arbitrary thing I do to try and force myself to experience multiple brands to see what I might like and be enthused about, not about the collecting. So, yeah, a very good point there, I think. Marked for time. Thanks for joining in. If you only care about the asset value, you're a collector. If you care about the historical evolution or the importance of the movement, perhaps the uniqueness, then you're an enthusiast. I think that's an interesting demarcation. That's obviously back to the discussion we were holding earlier about the notion of like caring about the movement. And things like that, because obviously some movements also command quite a premium asset wise, more so than what the cased version of the watch is. It was that the movement made the watch unique, not so much anything else. Thomas says, I would consider myself a watch enthusiast mainly because I feel that the collector category implies someone with lots of money who indulges in higher end watches. Okay, that's interesting because I never thought of it that way, because I've known a lot of people who call themselves watch collectors, and they only play in the affordable end, at least from the collection standpoint. Like, there are people I know that they might own a Tudor or an Oris or an Omega or Rolex or whatever, but what they buy most of the time are like micro brands. They're clearly collecting micro brands, and they call themselves collectors of micro brands. Like, I know some people like try and get all the, maybe not all, but they try and get like a bunch of the, like, they collect Zealous. They're really into Zealous, and they're trying to get a variety of dial designs from Zealous, but they're real loyal to the brand. And in and of itself, Seiko is probably the to me the ultimate example. If you ever see state of the collection videos on YouTube, and some people put them out multiple times a year. I usually do mine in November or December, but a lot of channels do them, even really, really, really small channel. I know this is a small channel, but some people that they don't record very much at all. A lot of them will still do a state of the collection. It's fascinating. I love state of the collection videos because it's just fascinating to me to see where people have gone. The number of people that have 100% or near on 100% Seiko collections blows my mind. And so they view themselves as Seiko collectors, and I view them as Seiko collectors. And we're not talking like they're getting a bunch of King Seikos. A lot of them are playing in the 4R movement range, and that's what they're building up. And for me, it's fascinating because I wonder why, especially with all the micro brands that are out there, once you're like on your 10th watch, I start to wonder why you don't branch out. But my analogy there does not really have to do with enthusiast or collector at all. I think a lot of you will identify with this. It's the meal phenomenon. How many of you, if you go to McDonald's or Taco Bell or KFC or whatever, or even a regular sit down, a fancier restaurant, always order the same thing? That I tend to. I try and get a rotation. I feel bad, so I do try and get a rotation. But like with Taco Bell, what rotation do I have? It's like I get crunchy tacos or I get soft tacos, and that's basically it. So like it's comforting. It's like comfort food. You like you like it. You don't want to take a chance, because I have gone, like, there's a Mexican restaurant nearby about a mile away I like to walk down to. I usually go there every other week to pick something up, and on occasion I will try something different, but sometimes I get burned. And what I tried, not only did I not like as much as what was my safe pick, I hated it. And so then I'm like, into the trash it goes. So I think, some people there, not to go on a total tangent, but I think, some people they'll try a Seiko and they'll like it. They like the dial. They like how it wears. They might be okay with the bracelet, or they might have a third-party strap that they enjoy, or they got it on a strap, which I'm not a fan of Seiko bracelets, but their straps I think are pretty good. And then it's like, okay, I know I like this. I'm not going to chance it with Citizen. I'm too nervous. I don't want to spend a few $100s and not like it. So Seiko I know is safe, and they just keep getting Seikos. But anyway, my point just being that I never, unlike Thomas, I never really viewed it as the higher end aspect for collecting. I see the argument, and that really ties in as well when you start thinking asset value and things like that. But again, maybe it's because as a kid in particular, my coin collecting, I didn't have any money, right? I was too young to work. I had an allowance. So most of my coins I got had to be stuff that basically had no real value much beyond what the face value of the currency was. So like at one point, I've fallen behind now, but I had every year of penny with Lincoln, like all the way up until like 1990 or something. Like every single one. Now I didn't have all the weird variants like the small S versus the largest versions or whatever, but I even had the steel ones. So like I could do that and collect, but my collection was like not even worth $50. So anyway, so I view it a little differently because of that, I think. But Thomas continues, that's wrong, I know, because there are Seiko collectors. Oh, I should have read this ahead of time. Vintage collectors, etc. I just find it hard dealing with the hierarchies and pigeonholes to put hobbyists into. Yeah, but again, as is common with collecting anything, there's a desire to stratify, and it's not necessarily driven by judgment, but it's driven by the desire to organize. And so I get it, but I try not to innately assume when someone starts stratifying people or collections or whatever, they're necessarily doing it for a snobbish reason. We like things in boxes, and it makes it easier for us to discuss and sort things. And so we put people in boxes. The problem is people don't like to be in boxes and they take offense to it. And so that's where you get that pushback. And I'm not saying that pushback's wrong. I'm just saying that it's not always driven by a desire to say I'm better than you because I am this type of collector and you are merely that type of collector. There are people like that. I have met them. and they are insufferable. But yes, it's interesting. Hagfish, welcome. Glad you could make it. And let's see. The Hagfish continues. I care about movements. They're the engine of the watch. Those who don't care about the movements can go get a Casio. It does the same thing of what a watch is meant to be, after all. Sure. Or they could get the new mechanical Casio, and then they just ended up with an NH35 all along. I still can't believe. I guess I can believe it. I'm still just disappointed in Casio for doing that. I just told myself they had to be making an in-house movement. I just was so let down when they didn't. Maybe I shouldn't be. I thought the watch looked nice. The edifice, I thought it looked nice. MCART says collectors, serious watch experts who collect watches due to retention and rarity. Enthusiasts are watch hobby guys who just like them and wear them as well. Okay, so most people tend to use an enthusiast branding the way I use it, which I guess is sort of nice. So when I call myself a watch enthusiast, I'm not falling into where Alan in this article that I linked in the video description did, where he was like, watch enthusiasts are just a bunch of dilettantes. Or whatever I think that's what he tried to write there, are a bunch of dilettantes, and true connoisseurs are collectors. I'm glad I'm seeing a lot of people that agree that like an enthusiast is not like a seen as a negative category. Because I will call myself a collector because I do have some that are just in the collection. They're not leaving the collection. But it's like six of my watches. Everything else is about enthusiasm. I like this watch. I like the way it looks. I like the way it looks when I wear it. I find it fascinating for some reason. Maybe the movement's fascinating, but I'm not like out explicitly collecting movements. I've not picked one watch over another watch because it gives me a different movement than the watches I already own. Usually, it might be an added secondary layer, but I just spend less time looking at the movements. I love good movement finishing, but honestly, I do not sit and admire the movements on my watches all that often. Because without a loop, it's difficult to. And one might find it odd to constantly carry a loop, though in my work bag, I do keep a loop. So again, there is a price to pay to getting into any hobby. and that price is the judgment of those that are not in it. Mark for Time says, if you have safe queens, you're a collector. If you wear all your watches, you're an enthusiast. Yeah, well, I mean, it's a maybe both in my instance then, and maybe that's why I do sometimes use both labels, because again, like the Sparrow Agnew watch that was gifted. I mean, both were gifted to me, but I have my one that's the wearable one, and then I have the one that I don't wear. Would I wear it if I had the movement serviced and I didn't own the other one? Yeah, I guess I would, but not all that often. It really just exists it has like no value. It's like a $10 watch, but it exists for collecting purposes, I guess, in terms of my ownership of it. So, because it really does just basically live in the safe, so to speak, or the watch box in this case. Tuna says Bill Saunders, that's the watch art site. I could not remember his name. Looks upon watches more a work of art. Yeah, I think that I agree with that too. I mean, it depends on the watch, right? Some of them are merely industrial exercises. Let's be fair, especially iterations of, hey, look, here's that watch, but now it's in blue. Oh, look, here's that watch, but now it's in red. But a lot of us, even in the enthusiast space, do appreciate the craftsmanship of it. And that's a big part of I'd say the watch romanticism in general is our fascination with the craftsmanship of it. This is why hand finishing, hand making, hand application, hand involvement is so important to people. It's why so many people latched on and I don't blame them, latched on so strongly when Hodinkee years ago did that deep dive of getting to visit the Rolex factory, and they confirmed against what a lot of people online were saying, which was that robots and machines are entirely assembling Rolex watches. And the Hodinkee guy went through and it's like, no, there's a lot of industrialization at Rolex, but there are parts of every Rolex watch that require human beings to by hand do something. And that it was like a sigh of relief from a lot of Rolex collectors, because I think one of the things that has always stung them the most of all the criticism, true or bad, one of the things I think that stings Rolex collectors in particular is when you suggest that they're basically getting a System 51 watch. It's just that they paid $9,000 to $15,000 for it. That really bothers them. Because they're not blind. They know that the brand makes 1 million watches a year. They know the watch isn't that special because of the production level. It's not rare. You can never argue, there are some models that are rare, but you can never argue the Rolex as a brand is rare. They make way too many watches. And it's fascinating that they're on the pedestal that they are with the production levels they maintain. And that's a big kudos to the company for being able to accomplish that. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, it's generally not all that hard to get a model of a Rolex. You might not be able to get the specific reference you want, like the special, weird, precious metal, small time production Daytona. But if you want a Daytona, there are plenty of them out there for you to find. So, it's one of those things. But the bridge too far was when people started saying, and I saw it all over the place, people just adamant that human beings don't work on Rolex watches, period. Just like, I don't know why they convince themselves of it, or they do it just to poke a finger in the eye of people who like Rolex. I never could figure it out. But Hackfish says, yeah, I'll take that dilettante approach, Dennis. Yes, that was a fascinating little category. Welcome, Ben 10, to the stream. What's on the wrist from people today? Mine is my Citizen, I think it's the AQ 4100 high accuracy quartz model. Cloudkin, welcome to live stream. How about we stop judging and let people do what they want with their money? Well, the stratification things, again, as I noted, people like to stick people in boxes, not necessarily for malicious reasons, but rather to understand like where they're approaching it from. But this notion, like people who just consume are pariahs, I didn't like this part that, again, this is from a few years ago, this article, but how he labeled it, the broadly accepted stratification of the watch community. I will agree that it may be that most people do think of it that there's watch consumers and watch enthusiasts are better, like they're more dedicated. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And then watch collectors are at the top of the pyramid. I don't know that we normally think of just people who consume as like pariahs to like we don't want them in the hobby. I don't think that's the broad sense. And that enthusiasts are mere dilettantes. There are enthusiasts that are enthusiastic about watches that are not in any way associated with like frilly dilettante. I mean, like people are like into G-Shock, for example. There are plenty that would fall into a watch enthusiast category, and no one's going to call them a dilettante. It was a very strange. I think he just added those in. I don't think that's what the broad sense would be. But people do try and describe themselves though too. So if someone's like, I've met people that have been like, they have an interesting watch, and I'll say, if I ask about it, they'll be like, oh, I'm not really into watches. Okay, so they're casual. I could use the word casual. They're casual. They're watch consumers. It's not neither good nor bad, but it's a reasonable box to put them in too. I don't know. I don't view it as judgment, but I guess it is assigning them something. But they kind of self-assign, like they like cars. I'm not a car collector. Someone were to see me in my Corolla, they're gonna be like, he's a casual car person. Like it's functional. It's not. I can appreciate nicer cars, but I'm not in that space. I don't want to be in that space. That's the last thing I need is another hobby. Holy cow. So yeah, it's one of those interesting things. But let's see. Mark for Time says, if you can't wear an Apple Watch, you can only wear mechanicals. You're an enthusiast. I place enthusiasts at a higher level than mere collectors. Enthusiasts can tell you the origin or history. So how would you classify someone, though, who would buy, let's say they only buy mechanical watches, but they don't know anything about the origin or history, but they've decided they only want to wear mechanical watches? I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know how I would do it. Also, there's that, here's the stratification that we don't talk about on this channel very much, but it definitely exists. Ken kind of hit on about judging people and spending of the money. I think a lot of that comes down to the judgment of people who buy expensive watches versus less expensive watches. But I'll tell you, the biggest judgment I've seen is quartz versus mechanical. And Mark for Time's comment reminded me that, because he drew a line between an Apple Watch and a mechanical watch, which I think is a line a lot of us would draw. But what about that line between a quartz watch and a mechanical watch? And let's make it even more complicated. Let's keep it relatively inexpensive. So the mechanical watch is a Hamilton field watch, and maybe we'll use G-Shock as our comparison. It came up earlier as an example of a simple watch. Like, you see a G-Shock on someone, you don't innately, I'm assuming, I don't. You don't innately assume that person is an enthusiast or collects watches. You don't assume anything. All you know is that they want to wear a watch. On the flip side, that's the same thought I have when I see a Rolex. I don't innately assume that they're an enthusiast or a collector. I just assume that they want to wear a watch. And in their case, they wanted to wear a nice watch. But I can't assume that. It's so ubiquitous. I can't assume that they're a collector. Seiko's in the same boat also, incidentally. It feels less so nowadays, but especially if it's a quartz Seiko, I just don't know. I don't know if they're into watches or not. They might just not be into smartwatches and they just want to wear a watch. So there are brands where you are sending a message that you're an enthusiast, a collector, or at least an enthusiast, right? Like, if you're a guy wearing a Chopard watch, I'm going to assume you're into watches in some capacity. Why would you ever wear Chopard why would that be your one watch? It's like, I could see a Rolex being a one watch. I did that for years. I could see G-Shock being a one watch. I could see Citizen or Casio or Seiko being, one watch people. Cartier, even though it's the number 2 manufacturer, I have to admit, I would assume you were into watches if I saw Santos, even as common as it is. Same with the Moon watch. I would assume you were into watches. But so most brands, I would assume, Baltic, Zelos, I'm assuming you're into watches. Daniel Wellington, no, I assume you're not into watch at that point because of how much you paid for that. But yeah, just one of those. It's interesting. I think it's interesting. I like Ben's response. I'm not sure what I am. I think I'm watch collecting fluid. Yeah. Another term I sometimes like to use that feels like I'm playing it really, really safe, but is I'm a hobbyist. Because I feel like I click all the boxes, right? I could be a collector, I could be an enthusiast, I could be knowledgeable. So here's something that comes up in pinball, but doesn't feel like it comes up much in watches, and that's because the price of entry is much lower in watches. Obviously, I've done this before, but here's your stratification of pinball pricing. Here's your stratification of watch pricing. So, because you can get a Casio 91 for just a few bucks. A working pinball machine is going to run you with solid state electronics, so late 70s beyond, is going to run you around $1,000 minimum. But brand new pinball machines tend to cap out under $20,000, and we know watches cap out at the millions in terms of they're not even piece unique. So given that, what I'm getting at about the term hobbyist is, one of the things I've run into is, in pinball, there are people who are into pinball who don't own any. You don't actually have to own them to be into them. Theoretically, this could be true for watches as well. I'm sure plenty of us have seen very, very nice watches that we admire, but we would never own them because they're too expensive. But it doesn't, we always define everything in this hobby as being about the possession of the object. And you could be into the movements and not have to own the movements. You could be into the finishing and not have to own it. And I think we kind of maybe subconsciously recognize this, but we don't celebrate it. We don't appreciate it much. And to be fair, that happens a lot in pinball too. There's almost a sense that you have to own at least one machine. But historically, that was never true. You would, just like you go to a watch show and appreciate a watch you don't own, you can go to an arcade and appreciate a game that you don't own. So again, part of it is just where I come from. I find that I sometimes like the term hobbyist because it doesn't presume, there's no judgment, and you're just saying it's another way of saying you're enthused, but there's no connotation to anything else about what about it is, whether you just appreciate them from afar or that you're into owning them. It's just hobbyist that says, I'm in the hobby. I've defined myself I've self-selected that I'm in the hobby. Your judgment need not be required. I've decided, and thus I use the term hobbyist. So that's kind of my my egalitarian term that I personally like. I like it for all hobbies, but it's never caught on here in watches. Eric, welcome to the live stream. I'm probably going to sound pretentious, but I have to admit, for me, there is a calming feeling when I have to wind and set my watch. It's 5 minutes when I'm singularly focused on something. I don't find it pretentious. I kind of got that earlier in the stream when I talked about certain dials. I just take a break. It's like taking a breath and counting to 10 and exhale. You know, people do all that. There's meditation stuff. I just mean like just basic, like, you know what, like when you were a kid and you were mad and you were told to count and calm down, just looking at something calming can be calming. That's what a lot of art is. And so, yes, there are watches and dials that do that for me. I didn't mention the experience of winding. That's one of my favorite things. That's why I don't usually put it in my reviews, but I've rated internally watches of mine that I have owned that have the best hand winding experiences because I enjoy them so much. My best hand winding experiences ever were the JLC Reverso, and I didn't keep that watch, but it has a great hand winding experience. And actually an automatic watch that I had, that I got rid of earlier this year, my Parmigiani Coppa Tonda, the old version Tonda. I didn't have one of the rectangle ones, it was a round one, but it's an automatic movement. But that winding experience was sublime, would be how I would describe it. So if it's pretentious, so be it. But I do agree with you. There's just something about it. I really like winding a watch. It's like, and when I don't want to wind a watch, like today, I'll grab a quartz watch. So it's all about mood. Hagfish says, how about watch connoisseur, Dennis? What definition would it be? That's just a fancy pants way of saying hobbyist, is it not? You're just like, you're saying you appreciate watches. That's what a connoisseur is. So, that's sort of my take. So yeah, it sounds fancier. It's a fancier way to say it. Ben says, I'm tired of seeing Seikos. Well, I mean, it is one of the biggest producers of watches. So the nice thing is a lot of them look different. I mean, it feels like a lot of them kind of look the same nowadays, but that's one thing I can really appreciate about Seiko, even as if you were to go in as a Seiko collector, if you're not just like getting a bunch of Seiko 5s with the same case profile, but you want to be like, I want a monster, I want a samurai, I want a I want a Seiko 5 sports. I want an alpinist. I want a Prasad. Like you can easily get a half dozen different looks. That's more than you can say about a lot of brands. It's a lot harder with a lot of other watch companies. But there are reasons for this, right? I mean, if every watch had a different case, just imagine the production costs. It's just not tenable. Hagfish says, I think I'd care more if the automatic hand-wound wristwatch is accurate enough to tell actual time. This is why movements are important, Dennis. Yes, and accuracy to an extent is important to me. Like and we talked about this a month ago, but I definitely feel for the idea of a movement advertising that it could be off 5 minutes a week, and that's okay, and that it doesn't need to be serviced under warranty is appalling to me in the 21st century. I know it's archaic technology, but our ability to make them is not archaic. Let's not pretend like we can't do any better than they did 200 years ago, because it's insulting, quite frankly. Patrick says, I almost always order the same thing at restaurants. I tend to as well. I sometimes will force myself to, but 2 weeks ago, I ordered some new pork thing I'd never tried at the Chinese restaurant that's like 5 minutes away from me, and it did not agree with me. And I love almost everything they've got. I've tried a lot of their stuff, and I was just like, I made a mistake. Why did I get the pork thing? I should have gotten the chicken thing I like, or any of the other 5 things I get. But in my Mexican restaurant example, not the Taco Bell, yeah, it's like It's soft shell tacos and crunchy tacos. And that's what I get. I get 6 tacos. That's my normal, that's like a large meal order. So there's basically no variety unless there's a coupon that forces me. But yes, I'm pretty consistent. I'm not proud of it, but I'm pretty consistent. Ben says, I see Seikos every day on Watch Crunch. Yeah, I mean, I post on Watch Crunch too. Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of homage brands on Watch Crunch as well, where you'll see something and at first I'll think it's something else, and then I'll look at the dial and it'll be a brand I've never heard of. So I see some diversity, but I mean, Seiko's just a really ubiquitous company. It's easy to get a Seiko, so there's going to be a lot of people that own them. But let's see. I'm sorry. Tuna says that out in the UK, they have yet to experience the delights of Taco Bell. There's a price to be paid, one way or the other, I suppose. Benton says watches are assets, right? If they have enough intrinsic value, most watches are to some degree an asset, right? Can you sell them for money? Generally, yes. There like if a Swatch, like not Swatch Group, but a Swatch watch breaks, probably not. So a Swatch watch might not innately be an asset in all situations. I suppose if you destroy any watch enough, it's not worth anything. A watch like a Rolex, almost, as far as history tells us, always has some sort of significant baseline intrinsic value. So yes, I would consider that most watches are assets. That does not mean that they will appreciate. That's a distinction. It's like is a car an asset? Absolutely. Is even a Corolla an asset? Absolutely. When I get rid of that car, I will get money for it, unless it's totaled. If I sell the car or trade it, there will be some value. Someone will want to have it at some price. It is an asset. If I was a business, would it be on my balance sheet as an asset? Yes, it would. So would watches. So yes, are watches assets? Generally speaking, yes. I suppose there are some that are absolutely like dime store cheap enough that they're not really assets. Or you might say assets are anything above a certain threshold. Like, what do we consider like capital equipment or significant equipment? Where I work, it's things over $5,000. So Rolexes would be assets, but most Seikos would not be under that scenario. Chopard watches, if they're LUC, would be, but and Alpine Eagles would be, but they have some other kind of more baseline stuff. Or May Mont Blanc would be a better. Minerva stuff would be an asset. Non-Minerva stuff, not quite a high enough value to be an asset. You see where I'm getting at? It's a line to be drawn, but broadly speaking, yes, they're an asset because they have an intrinsic value that you can get when you sell them. Ken says, just stop being around the bush and say you don't like investors. Like, I don't mind investors one way or the other. What hobbyists often don't like about investors moving in mass into a hobby is it changes the ability for them to acquire watches or anythings at the price that they want to buy them for, what they feel is the true value. But the true value is whatever the market says it is. So do a lot of people who are not investors look down on investors for ruining their hobby? Absolutely, because they did come in and make it more expensive. It's kind of hard to argue any other way. And so if all you were in it was for the sport of it, and someone came in to make it a business, because that's what it feels like, there's going to be bitterness to that because you disrupted the equilibrium that already existed. The investor disrupted the equilibrium. Again, pinball, I know so much better than watches. I draw way too many parallels, I suppose, with it. But this happened in the pandemic. I'm not even going to use the word investors, but I'm going to call it the speculation class. There was a lot of speculation. There's more of like an investor class in watches. Pinball, we had a speculator surge during the pandemic. And for a lot of people, myself included, quite frankly, it was deeply frustrating if I was trying to get pins. Like I wasn't actively, I mean, I got like one pin in the pandemic, so I guess I was still buying, but people just started buying up like every limited edition. You guys remember this during like with Ming for a while, right? Where all the limited, like people were like trying to buy. And I guess this happens with sneakers all the time. And then they try and flip them for a profit. There's nothing exciting. I mean, I guess it may be exciting for the flipper, but it's not exciting for anyone else because they're like, well, the brand says this is the value of the product. Why do I have to pay more than what the value of the currently in production product is? Now, it's sometimes the brand's fault because they limit it. anyway, in pinball, that's what happened. The supplies were limited because supply chains were disrupted. And so there were people who were buying up games and then selling them. And some of them weren't doing it for nefarious reasons. You could buy anything pretty much and sell it for more than you bought it. Like if it wasn't a limited model, you might only make like $200, but still it was 200 more than like I got to play this thing 500 times and I sold it for a profit. Sign me up. Except everyone who wanted something for their collection was pissed that everything was expensive. So I don't think you can really be surprised that people would be annoyed by that if they're into something not to make money and then people come in. There's a saying, money ruins everything. And that saying exists for a reason. I don't believe money ruins everything, but I can't disagree that when investor classes and speculators move in, they change the dynamics, and it's people don't like it when their hobbies are disrupted. And that works on a variety of fronts. There are probably people into watches who do not want more people to be into them. I don't see that too much in watches. I see it in pinball because they worry that the more people who come into the hobby, the more expensive the hobby will be. Not even from an investor speculator sense. It's just more competition, more demand means higher prices. There are some people who were in the hobby well before I was, like in the early 2000s, who could buy games that now sell for $4,000 to $6,000, who'd buy them for $400 to $600. They're pissed that those days are gone. Absolutely pissed. And it's because people like me came in and demand increased. And they liked it better when the hobby was dying. We might see that with watches at some point. I don't know. Watches are so much more usable than pinball machines. I don't really foresee it in that same way. Let's see. Catfish is disappointed with the Casio automatic. I didn't know anyone who's excited about it. Patrick doesn't like investors, but Patrick, you like limited edition watches, and those encourage investors. So, I mean, we pay a heavy price in any choice we make. Patrick says, I thought Casio would develop their own accurate but cheap in-house movement, but here we are. That's what I assumed, just because, I mean, they had their own movement tech already, but I guess mechanical was a bridge too far that they didn't want to cross that bridge. I don't know. Ben says, I do consider movements, especially after having vintage Rolex with the caliber 3130. Marked for Time says, I have an El Primero for its importance in history. It saved Rolex and was also created in my birth year. Enthusiast, not collector. Ben also thinks that the SW300 seems solid. Farrer's using those movements. I've heard good things about the SW300. I've never owned one myself. I've heard more, but I've heard less positive about the SW300 and just more negative about the SW200. So let's see. Tuna notes that this is Bill with Watch Art Sci, has an impressive collection. I don't even know what all's in his collection, but his depth of knowledge, he's very friendly. His depth of knowledge is intimidating to me, though. Like it's like him and like how Tim Mosso can remember so much about watches. It's fascinating to me how both of their brains are able to. And I don't mean like reference, like people who rattle off reference numbers. It doesn't impress me. It's just another way of memorizing names, and I'm not good at that, but I also don't really appreciate it as a skill because I think it's it can be seen to me as a cheap substitute for actual watch knowledge. To be like, hey, look, I'm wheeling. This is because of the backpack dealers, quite frankly, during the pandemic. They just memorize a bunch of Rolex and Patek reference numbers, which, to be fair, their numbers are memorizable. It's not like Omega reference numbers, which used to be memorizable, and now good luck to you. But they make you, to me, it always felt like I'm trying to make you think I know about watches because I said the 16570 instead of the Explorer 2 from the 2000s. Like, wow, look at how I must know everything about the movement, right? I couldn't tell you the caliber that's in my Explorer 2. I don't remember. They used two different versions in that model during that reference. So, and all I know is I have the inferior one. I don't have the newer one. Let's see. Jumping ahead a bit because I've fallen quite a bit behind on the. Holy cow! I've fallen a lot. Let's see. I'm just gonna have to skip all the way to the end here. Patrick says, I saw a solid gold FP Journe on the wrist at a watch event. I was impressed he got it at retail. That's tough to do. Odd fella. I bet you think he's an enthusiast, but I think he's a collector. It would be. I mean, I can't really like judge unless I knew more about what he had, right? I mean, I don't care all that much. For me, the label is more about how the label is being applied to me versus how I would apply the label to my approach is whatever you say you are is what you are. If you say you're an investor, you're an investor. If you say you're an enthusiast, then that's what you are. If you say you're just a connoisseur, then you're just a connoisseur. It's however you choose to say it. Part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe whatever it is that I am. So it's tough. Tough for me to solve. I don't think it's like we're not going to lose sleep over this. Ken says, you lose a lot of money on watches, then you're great and approved watch guy. You hold value or God forbid, make a little bit. Grr. I mean, the feeling to get out of a watch and not lose money or make money is great. I got out of my Oyster Perpetual at a gain and I felt pretty darn good about it. The Parmigiani Tonda that I got rid of this year, I traded it value at the same amount I paid. So I didn't gain, but I didn't lose. It feels like winning. I'm not in the hobby for my watches to appreciate. I'm not an investor, but I don't think you should be honor bound to sell at a loss. That would just be stupid. So, the thing is, I don't want to because I'm not an investor, I'm not choosing my watches in the hopes that they will go up in value. I'm choosing them for other reasons. So for me, it's really more of a crapshoot. And yeah, I've lost money on most of the watches, but that's because most consumable products, even assets of note, you lose money on. Most cars don't go up in value. Like if I held the Corolla for 50 years and sold it in my 90s, it'd probably still not be worth what I bought it, right? I mean, it's just too common of a car. It's just, it was never meant to achieve, it's an asset, but it was never meant to be an appreciating asset. I don't really get so annoyed at, I don't really get so annoyed at people buying watches to speculate on them. I get more confused at people who buy them or like the market dynamic confuses me more so. And again, it depends on the watch. It depends on the model. Something rare, something obscure, totally understand that. Auctions, I can't stand. But that's not a watch specific thing. Every time I learn anything about auctions, I just feel like it's like the most corrupt nonsense not that I've ever heard of. That would be NFTs, but just like, I'm like, there's a lot, it just feels like a real shady world. And so when I hear people talking about auction results in any hobby, I start to get annoyed because I feel like auctions are like a pretend world. And somehow we're pretending like it's an actual market analysis. I don't know. I don't have an answer there. I don't have enough detail on auctions. I've never bought anything from an auction that wasn't like eBay. So not my world. But that one, when I think about it, I always shake my head because I listen to some watch podcasts and some of them are really into following the auction stuff. And I'm just like, guys, I'm not sure it's real. I feel like it's kind of a pretend space where you're pretending these things have value. Again, if it's like piece unique stuff, whatever. I guess it is what it is, and the auction decides what the auction decides. But I don't know, the ghost buying and the pretend bids and all the rest of it. That part of anything, any collect, and we've seen it in pinball too. I'm just like, I don't know. I just think it's kind of gross. But hey, some of you guys might like auctions, so more power to you. But that's it. We actually ended up going way longer than I had planned. I thought this would be like a 35-minute discussion. So thank you for all the comments and feedback and different ways to approach the hobby. And what did we solve? We solved nothing. That's all these live streams do, is they solve nothing. But I think maybe we've decided what terms we like to apply to ourselves, whether we're enthusiasts or collectors or investors or connoisseurs or hobbyists, and that definitely more people, at least who watch channels like this, seem to be into the label watch enthusiast and not seeing collector as a superior category, and more open to just being something that says you're into the hobby. So anyway, that's it for this video. I do plan to have a pre-recorded video coming out soon. I actually had hoped to get it out before this, but I just couldn't get the editing done. I know there have been a few videos lately about the fall of Swatch. I will have one about ideas on how to fix Swatch. Decided to go ahead and take the other side of the coin. So we can go ahead, and I don't know if it'll be any good or not. I'm sure it will do terribly, but I thought it was fun to put together. So anyway, it was nice to do something that wasn't just the live streams. And I will plan to be back next Saturday. That's it. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Those of you in the US, hope you enjoy your Labor Day. And I will talk to you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.